I'm not human. I'm a nightmare demon. I feed on fear. What makes a midnight radio host so uniquely captivating? In my natural form, I'd move through people's nightmares, drain their terror, and leave them waking up drenched in cold sweat. But I got tired of that. I got tired of getting my energy by scaring people. So I chose a different way to exist. I hid who I was, blended into the human world, landed a job at a late-night radio station, and sat down in a soundproof glass booth with a microphone in front of me. My name is Marcus Sterling. I'm 34 and I host a late-night radio show in Chicago. It's called Midnight Frequency and it runs from midnight to 3 a.m. Ratings have always been rock bottom. I play old records, read listener letters, and every now and then I take calls from insomnias. Their voices are slurred and tired like they've been adrift in the dark for way too long. The first week, I talked like any ordinary host, reading scripts, playing music. My voice was steady and calm, just the way a late-night DJ should sound. I thought that was the best I could do, pass as human, pretend to live a normal life. But then, at 2 a.m., the phone line lit up. A man came on the line. His voice was low, like he'd just sat up in bed, or maybe he'd never actually gone to sleep. I can't sleep. It's been 3 days. Every time I turn off and off the lights, I feel like someone's standing by the bed, but when I turn them back on, there's no one there. I asked him what he was afraid of, and he said, "The thing in the dark. When I close my eyes, I hear breathing." I could feel his fear, a low-frequency, steady energy like the darkness itself was sending out a signal, waiting to be taken. "Can you describe that breathing?" "It sounds like my own breathing, but slower." "Listen again. Right now. Is it still there?" "No." It stopped. His breathing started to deepen, like someone who'd finally put down a weight they'd been carrying forever. I didn't hang up. What he needed was a good night's sleep, and I gave him a way to get there. Not by bowering his fear, but by guiding him to let it go. And then I realized I felt something like satisfaction. It wasn't the sharp hit of terror. It was something lighter and warmer, like a gentle breeze moving slowly through me. It was a more lasting, quiet kind of fulfillment. I sat behind the mixing board and let the settle around me in the dark. The city outside was asleep, and I was living in a way I'd never expected. That night, the phone line didn't light up again. But the next day, the man left a message on the station's board. "Thank you, I fell asleep." I stared at those words for a long time, then put the phone down and didn't reply. I was thinking this was the first time I didn't get energy from scaring someone. I just listened, and someone fell asleep. After that call, things started to change. Over the next few days, the phone line started lighting up regularly after 1 a.m., sometimes at the exact same time, sometimes a little earlier. Most calls said variations of the same thing, but I heard your show and wanted to try.
"I wake up every night and can't get back to sleep."
I don't even remember the last time I slept 4 hours straight. You can tell me what you're afraid of. On the other end of the line, their fears came through in all kinds of forms. Fear of the dark, fear of isolation, fear of losing control, and those images they'd never told anyone, packed into spaces between their words. I listened quietly. As I listened, I could feel the texture of the fear, its shape, its color, its density, rising out of their voices and being drawn into me. But not like swallowing, more like receiving. It passed through me like water through a riverbed and kept flowing out. After every call, they'd say, "I feel so much better, I don't know why." I said, "You can call again tomorrow if you need to." More and more people started calling. The show's time get longer, didn't get ringing, from midnight all the way into the early morning.
Did you change the music? Listener feedback is way better than before.
I didn't change the music, I just answered the calls.
What did you tell them?
I asked them to describe what scares them.
Sounds kind of like therapy.
Maybe it is. I didn't tell him I was also feeding on their fear, only now I was feeding differently. Before I created fear like a hunter traps, like our ever accepting rain. And then I sit behind the microphone late and let that rain through me seeping where into longer. It wasn't as intense as passed through into me. Slowly, steadier. It didn't make me full, but it made me calm. On the fourth night before the show started, I sat in front of the board and looked out at the Chicago night. There was a glow on the horizon like the city itself were breathing, and I suddenly realized something. I wasn't hungry. As a nightmare demon, I'd gone 3 full days of getting energy by scaring anyone. I'd been finger rested lightly on the micro, feeling getting the cool metal surface, and then the phone line lit up. In the third week of the show, I got a special call. The caller was a woman with a very soft voice, like she didn't want to wake anything up, or maybe like she was afraid someone would overhear her.
"I can't sleep, but it's not because I'm scared.
Do you have plans for tomorrow?"
Just keep thinking I have pressing inventions, all ordinary stuff, but my body wakes up in the middle of the night like it's already getting ready."
I could feel that her fear was different from the others. It wasn't fear of darkness or the unknown, it was finer, denser, like a film coating every thought. Try describing that getting ready process. She started. She described her anxiety and then she brought up mother, a thing her mother used to say was little, "You're never quite good enough." She'd never told that to anyone. As she spoke, her voice slowed down and her breathing got steadier, like she was finally setting something down. At one point, her voice got so soft I could barely hear her. "Hello?" She didn't answer. She'd already fallen asleep. I kept the line open until her breathing evened out completely, then gently disconnected. Her fear wasn't thick. It didn't give me a full feeling. But that sense of release was itself a kind of nourishment. It came from a different place, not as thick, but more lasting. I sat behind the board in the dark for a while. Outside, the city was asleep, and I was living in a way I'd never imagined. I kept wondering, could fear take another form? Not sharp or cold, but dull and heavy and warm. She showed me it could. That film of, "You're never quite good enough." It's thin, but you've carried it for decades. When she spoke it out loud, a crack appeared in that film. And then she fell asleep. That was the first crack. A month later, listener letters started piling up. Most of them said things like, I haven't slept in so long. I listened to your call, but I was afraid I'd fall asleep. My show's ratings started climbing, from dead last to the middle of the plaque, and they didn't drop back. The station manager noticed. You've been doing well lately. Keep it up. I will. Your listeners are incredibly loyal. A lot of them stick around just for your slot. Maybe because it's quieter at night. Maybe. He didn't ask why. He didn't know what I was actually doing. He just saw the numbers going up. But I knew, behind that microphone, that those numbers were real people, opening their eyes in the dark and slowly closing once the call connected. If you can't sleep tonight, you can call. I'm just someone who answers the phone late at night. After I said that, the phone line lit up for 3 full seconds. Not one call, 3. They all came in at once, jammed the lines, glowing for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, what I felt was trust. The kind people give only when they have nowhere else to turn. It was so heavy that for a moment, I almost forgot I was a being who fed on fear. I picked up the first call. Her voice sounded young, maybe mid-20s.
I just heard you say you just answered the phone, so I called.
You called.
I don't have anything to say, I just can't sleep. I listened to your show and I still can't sleep.
Then just stay on the line, you don't have to talk.
Your voice, it sounds like someone who won't rush me.
I really won't rush you.
I'll call again tomorrow.
She hung up. I sat there, and those words, someone who won't rush me, hung in the air for a long time. After she hung up, I was still holding the headphones, like they were a line I'd just pulled taut. As I kept talking to people, I learned to recognize the different textures of fear. Some people used clear words. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of being alone. Others leaned toward metaphors, like someone standing behind me, like a hand pressing my chest, and some would pause mid-sentence, searching for the right way to put it. I discovered that fear isn't always loud and sharp. Sometimes it's quiet, like a thin layer covering the surface of a voice. It holds its breath briefly after every word. I could sense it even for a trace in the voice. How often a word was repeated, rhythm of a sentence, tiny fluctuations in tone. Those signals alone were enough for me to know it was there. One night a man called and then went silent for a long time. I waited. I didn't push. I don't know how to say it. What I'm afraid of doesn't have a name. That's okay. You don't have to name it. You can just let it sit there for a while and then it will leave on its own. It's not there anymore. I don't know if it really left or if he just finally stopped chasing it. But in that moment, I felt that gentle energy flow into me again. It was light, faint, but it was there. I was thinking, nameless fear is the deepest kind because you can't call it out. But once it's spoken, even just as I don't know what to call it, it takes up a place. And then you can leave it there for a while, and then it leaves on its own. That was the first time I knew for certain. I didn't need to create fear to survive. I only needed to hatch and let it flow away. Like putting your hand to couch was back up, but your hand has already been wet. One time, a listener picked up and didn't say a word. He didn't hang up, didn't clear his throat, just breathed quietly on the line. I could hear his breath rising and falling on the other end, like he was hesitating, looking for a way in. You don't have to talk. You can just listen. He didn't answer, but he didn't hang up either. His breathing was slowly settling, like he was letting go of tension inch by inch. If you don't want to describe anything, you can tell me where you are. At home. Do you like this place? I used to. And now? Now it's just a place to sleep. His voice was soft, like he was afraid of being overheard. I could feel his fear. It was tightly wrapped, habitual, woven into rhythm of his daily life so deeply that he hardly even noticed it anymore. It came back every night, but he'd stopped trying to name it. You can stay here a little longer. He didn't reply, but his breathing started to deepen. The fear didn't leave completely. It just moved to a quiet place. I kept talking until he fell asleep on the other end. Then I gently disconnected the line. The satisfaction I felt that night was faint, but it was steady, like a creek, not a flood. Always there, moving through me at its own unhurried pace. I sat by the board for a long time, looking out at windows that were still lit. I thought, that man back there, he didn't know my name, didn't know what I looked like, didn't even know if I was real, but he gave me his breathing. He nightmare demon, trusted enough for someone to fall asleep next to. That was the first time I felt like maybe I was living the right way. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing something. My show wasn't just helping the people who called in, it was helped the ones listening too. Someone wrote on the board, I didn't but fell asleep while listening to you talk, and first time I had just insomnia and scared. I could feel their fear. It traveled through the airways and somehow, when my voice reached them, it released, like it had finally found a place to land. It felt like it was being drawn out, not suppressed but removed. I adjusted the rhythm, I stopped taking every call, and I started weaving long silences in the broadcast. If you don't need to speak, you can just listen. And then I'd go quiet, letting the silence fill the channel, giving them somewhere to rest inside it. Those silences worked better than I'd ever expected. Sometimes the longest silence brought the most quiet. Last night I fell asleep. I sat behind the board and realized I'd found a kind of healing that didn't need words. Sometimes not speaking is more useful. Fear could be heard in the silence, and then let go in that same silence. That came from a listener's message. She said, I don't need you to talk. I just need to know you're there. I read that line on the show, and then I held 4 minutes of silence. The next day, the board had a new message. I fell asleep during those 4 minutes, thank you. By the 4th month, the show had climbed to #1 in its time slot. Advertisers started reaching out to the station, wanting to buy airtime. We might have sponsors. Your show is the only one in this time slot with real. What kind of backers are we looking at? Sleep aids, pillows, melatonin, white noise machines. They think your show reaches a market they can sell to. Okay. I stood there for a moment, thinking about the people who called, opening their eyes in the dark, putting their fear in the phone line, and slowly closing their eyes again with my voice beside them. If I put a pillow ad in the middle of that quiet, the quiet would get heavier. It'd turn into something else that needed to be filled. The advertisers ended up signing 2 deals, a memory foam pillow brand and a sleep mist spray. The show started getting called Midnight Slumber. Ratings didn't drop. I kept doing the same thing, entering late at night, listening to insomnia, their fears, and letting those fears leave when it was time. But I noticed a change. When the ads ran, the silence on the listener's end got thicker. Not quieter, tighter. They didn't mind the 30-second spots, but they were waiting. Waiting for the ad to end, waiting for my voice to come back. They weren't there for the pillows. They were there for someone who wouldn't rush them. I kept that observation to myself and didn't tell a soul. Late one night, I got an unusual call. The caller sounded young, barely an adult, and there was no obvious emotion in his voice. Word choices were careful, restrained.
I heard you can make people fall asleep.
It depends on whether they're willing to let themselves.
I want to know what that feels like.
Have you slept before?
Not lately. I've been awake the whole time.
Try closing your eyes, then tell me what you see.
I see a room. No windows. I'm walking, but I'm not sure where I'm going.
Do you know where that is?
It might be my room. Or maybe not.
His voice showed no obvious emotion, like he was reciting something he'd told himself basement before. But when he said, "I'm not sure if it really happened or if I made up," his voice got quieter.
You can leave it here, then try to sleep.
He didn't answer, but his breathing started to slow, like he no longer had to hold up that weight. I sat there, listening to his breathing go from shallow to deep. That was someone who'd been trapped in the dark for so long, finally letting himself close his eyes.
I was in that basement, but I'm not sure if it's real. If it's not real, then why am I scared of the dark?
I didn't answer, because some questions don't need answers. The fact that he asked, that already meant he was looking for the way out. My show wasn't just listening anymore, it was becoming a listening zone. Some people never called, but they'd tune in every single night at the same time and only turn it off after I said my last words. They never commented or left any feedback. I didn't know who they were, their names, their faces, how they lived, but they were listening to me, waiting for me to finish each broadcast like they were waiting cycle close. I could feel their presence. Not through sound, through that quiet, steady sense of being there. It was as easy to miss as the air in a room, but if you stopped to feel it, you knew someone was there. I know some of you are listening without speaking. That's okay. Your presence has already been heard. After that night, a new message appeared on the board. Just thank you for saying. No name, no picture. I read it out loud, then went back to the music. In that moment, I realized what I was doing had gone beyond being a show. It had become a space, one that could hold anyone in the dead of night. A space with no appointment needed, no explanation required, no need to prove you were really having trouble sleeping. All you had to do was turn the dial to that number at 1 a.m., and then you were there. I sat in the middle of that glass booth, surrounded by soundproofing and equipment. I was thinking, a nightmare demon had created a space where humans could sleep peacefully. I used to trap people with fear. Now I held a pocket of silence with my voice. It was the same motion, just pointing the other way. There was a woman who called regularly, always around 1:30 in the morning.
I live at the end of a long hallway. Every time I walk from the living room back to my bedroom, I pass a window. Outside that window is an old oak tree. During the day, it looks perfectly ordinary, but at night, its shadow falls across the hallway floor.
Do you see that shadow every time?
Yes. And every time I see it, I get scared.
But you've seen it so many times. It never changes.
I know it doesn't change, but I'm still afraid.
Her fear wasn't really about the shape of the shadow anymore, it was about the moment she walked past it. That moment had become a trigger, a rhythm that had been carved into her body over and over. I let her story unfold naturally, and then I let it stop where it was supposed to stop. I didn't guide it back up, I just let it stay where it was. Next time you pass that window, you can just nod at it, like you would at an old neighbor you've known for years. She was quiet for a moment, then let out a soft laugh.
I'll try that.
That laugh was so light, like a leaf landing on the ground. But it was the first time she'd laughed in all those calls. I sat there, hearing that laugh come through the line so light, like a leaf landing on the ground.
Good night, Marcus.
That was the first time I'd heard her say goodnight before hanging up. She laughed. She said goodnight. She walked out of that hallway. One night, I fell asleep, not that half-asleep doze during the show, but real, full sleep. While I was asleep, I had a dream. I didn't see any images, I only heard a sound. The shadow of that old oak tree moving, so faint, like a melody that had been replayed many times. Then I woke up and realized it was just an ordinary dream, just an extension of the late-night show, in a different setting, playing in a different way. It didn't change anything, But it taught me one thing: even a nightmare demon can dream. The things we feed on, fear, anxiety, unease, they don't just disappear. They rearrange themselves inside us and resurface in another form. I dreamed about that oak tree's shadow because that woman's fear had become a part of me. I experienced it again, as a dream. The next night, the woman called again.
Last night when I passed that window, I nodded at it. The shadow was still there, but it didn't feel as scary as before.
That's good.
I think it might just be there, without any ill intentions.
Maybe it was just waiting for you to recognize that it's only a tree.
Good night, Marcus.
And she hung up. I sat behind the board with nothing but dial tone in my headphones. I was thinking I'd consumed her fear, and then I'd dreamed about that tree's shadow. Her fear had rearranged itself inside me into something audible, a melody I could hear. It didn't hurt me. It just made me dream. I started noticing something. Some listeners, after they'd called a few times, would stop calling for a while. Maybe they didn't need help anymore, or maybe they'd found other ways to get through the night. Some would call back after a few weeks, but the gaps would get longer and longer until they stopped needing my voice altogether. They didn't show up, and they didn't say goodbye. They just stopped being on the other end of the line. I couldn't confirm whether they'd found another way to fall asleep, or if they just no longer needed my voice to calm their fears. One night I went through the call log and saw a name with a note next to it. Last call, 6 weeks ago. I remembered his voice clearly. A middle-aged man who always called at exactly 2:47 a.m., and he'd say he'd dreamed about the accident again. On that last call 6 weeks ago, he said, "I went to that road during the daytime today and walked along it. Nothing happened. It was just an ordinary road." That's good. I don't think I'll dream about it anymore. And after that, he never called again. I turned past that entry, and I felt no loss. He didn't need me anymore. That was the best thing he could have given me. Someone who no longer needs a late-night radio show is someone who's found their own sleep. He no longer dialed my number at 2:47 a.m. At 2:47, he was already asleep. I didn't mention him on the show, but in my mind I said a quiet goodbye to him. Not a farewell, an acknowledgement, acknowledging that he'd walked that whole path. The station manager told me our show had been recommended on a local radio chart. "People are calling your show the channel that puts you to sleep. They say listening to you is like switching off the noise in your head." That's just a description. I know, but it's become a label. A label on a late-night show doesn't really matter. It's just shorthand for an experience. But I started getting gifts from listeners. Handwritten cards, small boxes of chocolates, a scarf. They didn't know where I lived, so they sent them to the station. At the front desk, I picked up a few packages, opened one, and inside was a letter with no return name, no address, just the words "Midnight Frequency" in the center. The letter had only one line: "Thank you for letting me fall asleep." I read that line a few times and put it back in the envelope. I left that letter next to the mixing board, not my bag. It didn't belong to my private life. It belonged to that glass booth, to those late-night hours. The paper had that worn feeling of being touched many times, like someone had held it and read it over and over. But I didn't ask myself if that was true. I just placed it by the lamp, near the microphone. It wasn't in my home, but it was in my space. And that was close enough. One night, a man called. There was an unsteady tremor in his voice, and he paused for long stretches between sentences, like he was checking whether he was ready to say it out loud. "My wife passed away. A little over a year ago. I dream about her every night. Not bad dreams, I just see her. But when I wake up, I still feel like she hasn't left." You wish she hadn't left. I wish she was still here, but I know she's not. You don't have to dream about her tonight if you don't want to. You can take one night off. Okay. His breathing deepened. He didn't hang up, and he didn't say anything more. There was no fear in his voice, only a grief that had settled over a long time and been chewed over again and again. I let him stay there, and then I turned off my microphone. Not his line, just my broadcast mic, so my voice wouldn't go on air. I let the silence fill the rest of the time until his breathing was completely stayed and then there was nothing left on his end but quiet waiting. The next day, the board had a dozen messages all saying the same thing. That silent last night was the deepest I've slept all week. He didn't know that man didn't know that they were all sharing that same silence. And that silence carried all the weight. I don't know if that man dreamed about his wife again. But I know that night, when he fell asleep, his breathing was steady. That was already better than where he'd been before he called. I started noticing that some nights, the show would take on a life of its own, a kind of presence that didn't actually need me to keep talking. In that state, my voice mattered less than the silence that came before it. A long pause, a steady breath, a quiet reply at just the right moment could do more than any stretch of monologue. Listeners were falling asleep in my silence. Not after finishing something, but when they no longer needed to keep listening. I learned to stop talking completely at certain points, just let the air fill with that faint electoral hum and wait for each listener to find their own moment to let go. I'd wait a while, then pick up the closing line again. Good night. You don't need to think anymore tonight. Then I'd turn off the mic. Those moments of silence were the closest I ever felt to something like healing. Not because of what I did, but because of what I stopped doing. Sometimes what a person needs isn't more information, just a space where they don't have to respond. The energy I felt in those silences was the purest kind, not from the release of fear, not from emotional catharsis, but from something deeper. Like someone finally giving themselves permission to just exist without having to do anything at all. Once, during a silence, I counted my own breath 7 full cycles. At the end of the 7th, I was about to speak again. Right then I saw the phone line flicker. Someone had called in at that exact moment. They'd sensed in that silence that I was about to start again, and that's when they dialed. My voice stayed with listeners even after the show ended. They told me the rhythm of my breathing, the timing of my pauses, the unfinished sentences. They'd replay them in their heads before falling asleep. They'd still hear those echoes after the radio was off. They didn't need my voice playing continuously, they just needed to know it had been there. In the gaps between those syllables, they'd find room to sleep. One night, a young woman left me a message after the show. I've been recording your show. I listen every night, and within about 15 minutes I'm out. Your voice has become the background to my sleep. I didn't know what to say back. I never meant to become anyone's background. I was just here, talking, saying things that might help people relax. But if my voice could really be someone's safety signal, then I was okay with being the background. Background isn't nothing. Background is what lets the foreground exist in peace. I typed a few words in the reply box, then deleted them. In the end, I sent just 3 words, "That's good." She said, "Do you even know who you are?" I paused, then said, "Someone who answers the phone late at night." She said, To me, you're the one who know I can fall asleep. That knowing matters." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I put the phone back on the table. One time, a listener sent me a recording. She'd captured herself falling asleep, from the moment she lay down to when her breathing slowed, all on her own phone. She said she wanted to confirm she'd actually fallen asleep. At the end of the recording, there was a quiet, almost inaudible breath, lasting a few minutes, and then the recording stopped. I didn't listen to the whole thing, just the beginning, and then I stopped. I confirmed the state of her voice, and then I deleted the file. She never sent anything like that again. But I remembered that recording not because it was special, but because it made me realize that some people need proof they actually fell asleep. They trust their own sleep so little that they need to record it to believe it. That was a different kind of fear, the fear that even when you're asleep, you're still awake. I said on the show that night, if you fall asleep, you don't need proof. Your body knows. Put the phone down, your body will know on its own. After I said that, the phone line didn't light up right away. But the next morning, I got message. Just one line, "I didn't record last night. I fell asleep." I marked it as read and didn't reply. She'd already found sleep without needing proof. The show kept going. Every night I'd walk into that soundproof glass booth, put on my headphones, turn on the mic, and wait for the first call. Every so often I'd notice that some listeners weren't calling as often as before. Their fear had shifted, the show wasn't as essential to them anymore, and they were starting to make it through the night without me. It was a kind of change that wasn't spoken, but you could sense it through the absence of their signal, like a light that used to go on at a certain time and now doesn't need to anymore. I sat behind the board, looking at those extinguished signals, and what I felt was close to peace. They weren't leaving out of disappointment. They were leaving because they no longer needed to stay. That was the best goodbye a host could ever get. I didn't mention those who'd stopped calling. I didn't say I miss those friends who don't call anymore. It wasn't really missing them. It was an acknowledgement that they'd found their own anchor and no longer needed my voice as their float. One day, a name floated back into my mind, the man who kept dreaming about the accident. He'd fallen off my call list 6 weeks ago. I suddenly wondered if he'd stopped waking up at 2:47 too. I thought so. On the late-night radio dial, you could pick up other stations' shows. Most late-night hosts use the same tone, soft, slow, even, like they were guiding listeners into a preset state. Their content varied, but the vocal structure was similar. They were all following the same idea: make the voice a non-threatening background presence. I felt like I'd found my own way of doing late-night radio. It wasn't quite the same, and it hadn't been absorbed into theirs. Late one night, I tuned to another frequency and heard a host's voice. He was talking about everyday things, calm and restrained. But underneath his voice, I could feel something else. A tiredness he might not have even noticed in himself. I turned off the radio. He wasn't my show, he wasn't my listener, and he wasn't my responsibility. But as I switched it off, I still wondered, did he, like so many insomniacs, face something alone in the dead of night? That night on my own show, I said, I heard a voice tonight that sounded like it was holding something up, not the content, the voice itself. If you're listening, you can rest. You don't need someone to hold it up for you to fall asleep. I don't know if that person was really listening. But I knew if someone had heard those words at 2 a.m., they'd know they were being talked about. They might pause for a moment, then turn off their mic, lean back in their chair, and close their eyes. This is Midnight Frequency. I'm Marcus. If you're still awake, you can keep listening. If you're already drifting off, you can turn off the radio and catch it tomorrow. If you decide to stay, I'll be here tonight. Then I'd wait for the phone line to light up. It usually did, not long after those words. That line, I'll be here tonight, had become a promise of sorts. Not a promise to fix anything, not a promise to solve anything, just a promise that if you showed up, you wouldn't be alone. Every time I said it, I could feel a slight loosening on the other end, like someone hearing a door creak open in the dark. I knew what that sound meant. It took me years to hear it, and years more to learn how to say it.
Are you really going to be here? Or is that just a line?
I'll be here, that's not a line, it's a location. When you dial this number, I'm at that location. He was quiet for a moment, then said,
So should I hang up?
You can hang up, or not. Either way, you're using that location. But he left a message on the board. I just checked, that location is definitely there. One night, a man who said he was a lawyer called. I spend all night replaying the cases I handled during the day. I can reproduce every word the other side said, every pause took, and I can't sleep. You need to shift your focus somewhere else. I've tried, but I always circle back to the case. If you describe the case out loud, how long would that take? About half an hour? Then you can describe it. And when that half hour's up, try leaving it in your voice. He started describing it. As he went on, his pace slowed down, like his thoughts were slowing right along with it. When he got to the crucial part, his voice got less clear. He paused, like he was searching for a word that didn't come. I'm tired. Then rest. I sat and listened to his breathing shift from conscious slowing to unconscious depth, that process of a voice turning from a person to someone falling asleep. I'd heard it many times, but it always made me go quiet. I took a call a while ago. A lawyer fell asleep on the line. When he wakes up tomorrow, his case will still be there, but he'll remember that tonight he slept. The next day, he left a message. You were right. I woke up. The case is still there, but I slept last night. That was all. It'd been a while since I'd read a reply that short on the board. When listeners described their fears, my voice would automatically find the right range, steadier, slower, letting the fear dissolve in its own time rather than being pushed down or talked over. The fear left its original spot, and those spots were later filled with something more neutral. After months on air, my voice had changed. I wasn't consciously controlling my tone anymore. It had adapted to the rhythm of the late-night channel, to the silent moments and the things left unsaid. One night after the show, I listened back to a recording, my own show from 2 months earlier. I could see that my voice was more rushed back then, with shorter pauses, like there was a faint impatience underneath. I didn't know when that change had happened, but it had happened. I was no longer the person from 2 months ago who sat behind the board waiting for calls. Now I was someone willing to wait longer. I said it on the show. I used to think silence was something empty that needed to be filled. Now I know silence is a place. You can sit in it without having to talk. After that, there was a long silence. More than a minute. You said, silence is a place last night. Sat in it. Thank you. By now, the phone line usage had settled into a steady rhythm. The line would usually light up within minutes of the opening and keep going until the show wrapped. Over time, calls had fallen into patterns. New listeners described their experiences in full, while regulars showed a different rhythm within the first few seconds. They already knew they didn't need to spell everything out. They knew I'd get it, that the unspoken fears could be read just as clearly. One night, a regular got on the line and said just one thing.
It's been a hard day.
I waited. About 30 seconds later,
Can I just stay on the line for a bit?
sure. He stayed for about 4 minutes.
Thanks. I'm good now.
That was the shortest call I'd ever taken, and one of the deepest connections I'd ever felt. He didn't need to be fixed, didn't need to be soothed. He just needed someone to know he was there, and I did. After the show, I wrote one word in my notebook, connected. No name, no date, just that word. I didn't need to keep talking the whole time on air. Sometimes, between calls, I'd just stop and wait for the next one to come in. I could sit there with my headphones on, listening to the faint ambient sounds in the distance, waiting for the line to light up again. In those gaps, I was just a silhouette sitting in the dark, waiting for the next call. One night, halfway through the show, the line stayed dark for a long time, longer than usual. I waited about 7 minutes, no calls. I didn't speak, didn't play music. I just left the channel open. At 8 minutes, the line lit up. A woman's voice, very calm.
I was just wondering if you'd fallen asleep.
I didn't fall asleep. I'm here.
Good.
That was it. 2 sentences and she was gone. She just needed to know I was there. Sometimes all it takes to confirm someone's still around is hearing 3 words, I'm here. When the show ended that night, I sat by the board for a while and ran those 3 words through my head twice.
Good.
Not the ones I said, the ones she said. She confirmed I was still here, and then she hung up. She didn't need anything more. A listener sent me a cassette tape. On the case was a sticky note that read, I can never capture the sound of myself while sleeping, but this time I did. The tape was a sound recording. It started with breathing, then the faint rustle of turning over, followed by a stretch of steady silence where the breathing evened out, and finally a lighter sound, like another shift in sleep. At the end of the recording was a soft breath, like she'd slipped into a deeper stage. The tape didn't capture any words or any distinct noises. I remembered that tape because it was the only physical cassette anyone had ever sent me. Kept it in the drawer of the mixing board, alongside the letters. They came from different people, but they were all the same thing. Someone was willing to entrust their quietness to me. I never played that tape a second time, but I knew it was in that drawer. It didn't need to be played again. It just needed to exist. Her sleeping sounds had been recorded. Proof that she really did fall asleep. Sunday nights, the show ran shorter than usual, from 1 to 3 a.m., just 1 hour of airtime, no call-in segment, no reading messages, no phone lines open, and no content planned. I sat in front of the board and didn't play any music. I just sat there, with the mic on, letting the channel fill with silence. There were lights outside, the windows across the street were lit, but those weren't my lights. No one called that night. Maybe they knew it was a rest day, or maybe there just happened to be no insomniers tuning in. I sat there in silence for a full hour, and I turned off the mic. That's it for tonight. See you next week. It wasn't a full show, but it was a full hour, an hour that didn't need to be filled. As I walked out of the booth, I felt a strange lightness, like those silences had been enough on their own. The hallway was quiet, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I stepped out on the terrace. 3 a.m. Chicago, wind coming off the lake, the streets empty, only the street lights glowing. I stood there and felt like this city wasn't the same one I used to know. I noticed that the fear listeners showed on the show didn't always come straight from its original source. Sometimes it seeped in from other channels. They'd mix fears from different places into one combined state. When they talked, they'd slide naturally from one thing to another, like those fears had already been stored in the same space, just never sorted. I didn't need to separate them. I could let them all be heard together, and let them settle where they naturally came to rest. I'm afraid that when my daughter grows up, she won't talk to me anymore. My father never talked to me when I was a kid. One night, a man said on the phone. He didn't make any transition between the two, but in his mind, they were the same thing. I didn't point out the leap. I let them stay there, connected in their own way. When someone carries fear from both the past and the future at the same time, what they need is a space where both can exist without judgment. That was what I was offering.
I never realized they were the same thing.
They're not necessarily the same thing, but they can be put down at the same time.
Good night, Marcus.
I could hear that his breathing had already gotten heavier before he hung up. One time, on a particularly quiet night, I fell asleep during the broadcast, and right in those few seconds, I drifted off, still wearing my headphones with that faint channel noise in my ears. No one noticed I'd fallen asleep because I didn't snore or make any sound. I was just there, quietly, out of the listener's sight, until the Shen time rolled around. When I woke up, the lights on the board had switched to a different state. I sat there stunned for a few seconds, realizing what had just happened. Then I checked the call log. No one had called during that stretch. Maybe it was because I was asleep, or maybe it was just a quiet stretch anyway. I didn't overthink it. I turned off the equipment, walked out of the booth, and locked the door. Walking through the early morning streets, I thought about those few minutes of sleep. I'd never fallen asleep around humans before. That meant I'd been here long enough that this place had started to feel like somewhere I could let my guard down. I'd fallen asleep here, among all those people awake in the dark, and I was the one who drifted off. And then I woke up. The lights were still on, the windows were still lit. The city hadn't changed because I'd dozed off for a bit. It had just kept on being there. A listener from another city called in. He said it to the station's online stream. I've been listening to your show for 3 weeks. I've never called before, but tonight I can't sleep. You're not listening locally? No, I'm in a different state. I found your show online. No, I've never done late-night radio before. Yours is the first one I've ever heard. I asked if he'd ever listened to anything similar. He described his life. He worked the night shift and usually got off after midnight. Back at his place, he'd turn on the radio, listen to my show, and fall asleep in the second half of it. He said my voice sounded like someone he'd known for a long time, even though he'd never seen my face. The way you talk, it makes me feel like I don't need to respond. I told him he didn't need to respond at all, just listen for a while and then rest. That was the first time someone from another city told me they'd found my voice. The internet had carried this show beyond the reach of the airwaves, to places I couldn't see. And in those places, people were awake in the same night. After he hung up, I sat there and thought. My voice had traveled across the airwaves to some room in another city. It played on a night shift worker's radio 15 minutes and then he fell asleep. He didn't know what I looked like. All I knew was that 5 nights a week at 3 a.m. he'd turn on that frequency. I've never seen a single one of my listeners. I don't know what they look like, who they are, or where they live. Their voices are the only part of them I ever touch, and the emotional states they send through the phone line are the only things I can read. But those voices are enough to form a full picture. I can hear from the sound alone where they are, whether they're in a bedroom or a car, whether they're alone, whether they're lying down or sitting up. I've never needed to see their faces. One night, a young woman said on the phone,
I want you to know that every time I call, I'm wearing the same pajamas. They're pink with little bears on them. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I just wanted to say it.
Thank you for telling me. Those pajamas sound comfortable.
They really are.
I didn't know her name, where she lived, or what she looked like. But I knew she wore pink pajamas with little bears on them, and that was enough for me to feel her presence on the other end. Before she hung up, she said,
I just wanted you to know I'm not some abstract person. I'm a person who wears bear pajamas.
I know. You're a person in bear pajamas awake at 2 a.m. who dialed a number.
Yeah.
She hung up. I sat there, and that detail stayed with me. Pink pajamas with little bears. I started to realize that the value of the show wasn't in how popular it was, or how many people tuned in. Its value was in one thing: whether it was still on the air. As long as there was still someone willing to turn on the radio late at night, waiting for those sounds to come through, this channel had already done what it was meant to do. I didn't need to know if those voices were being heard. As long as they knew there was a place where they could let out the fears they'd been holding in, that was enough. One night, a listener said on the phone, "I've never felt like anyone would pick up in the middle of the night, but every time I call you, you're there." I'm always here. That's enough. After that call, I sat there for a long time. He was right. Sometimes a person doesn't need to fix anything, doesn't need to be healed. All they need is to know that at 2 a.m., if they pick up the phone, there'll be someone on the other end. Someone who doesn't need to say anything, just needs to be there. Before the show ended, I said, "If you pick up the phone, there'll be someone on the other end. He's there. He won't hang up." After I turned off the mic, the phone line lit up once more. I didn't pick up, it was after the show. But the line was lit. It was telling me that someone had picked up at that hour, maybe just to check. And then they put it down. 3 in the morning, the show's over. I turn off the mic and take off my headphones. The streets are quiet, the street lights still burning. I lock the station's glass door, walk out of the building, cross the empty streets, and head back to my place. Tomorrow night, I'll come back to the same building, sit behind the same mixing board, turn on the mic, and wait for the line to light up again. There'll always be someone who can't sleep, someone who needs a voice in the dead of night to help them get through those long hours. My show doesn't really have a formal name, just a time slot, a stretch of time that can be listened to, late at night, before sleep comes. People can tune in whenever they want, and turn it off whenever they want. It doesn't change because it's being heard, it does appear when it's not, just exists there, staying open. I walk back home, wash my face, change my clothes, pull open the curtains. The sky's starting to lighten, the city's emerging from the dark. I sit by the window and watch the sunrise, feeling that gentle energy still flowing slowly through me. It's not the sharp hit of fear, it's something more lasting. It's what the listeners left behind when they pick up the phone in the middle of the night and put their fear in their voices. They don't know what they gave me, they only know they took something from me. But energy flows both ways. Fear comes back to them, and come wake in the city, and they're asleep. Tomorrow night I'll go back to that glass booth and keep doing the same thing. Because there'll always be someone who can't sleep. There'll always be someone at 2 a.m. who picks up the phone, dials a number, and hopes someone will answer. And I'm always there. 3 in the morning, dawn is near. I close my eyes and rest for a bit, knowing that in a few hours I'll walk back into that room, put on the headphones, and say those opening lines into the mic. And the phone line will light up. It always does. If you hear a voice in the early hours, that voice doesn't belong to anything you know. It's not from reality, and it's not from a dream. It just lives on a late-night frequency, waiting for you to find it. And when you do find it, you'll hear the simplest of words. You're already here. If you hear a voice in the dead of night, it might not be coming from any station. It might be coming from the place you've been trying to stay away from. Some fears don't need to be erased. They just need to be heard. They also live in late-night broadcasts, waiting for someone to pick up. He doesn't need your name, he only needs your voice. For everyone who's ever listened to Midnight Frequently, and for everyone still awake at 2 a.m., someone else is awake out there too, waiting for the line to light up.